Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons, and love are told. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our heart-touching stories. When I first stood before the towering black gates of the mansion on Bishop Adme Drive, Banana Island, the air felt heavy with something I couldn't name. People called it the Palace of Broken Spirits. 9 maids had passed through those gates in 6 months, each leaving with more tears than belongings. But for me, leaving was never an option. My daughter Deborah was lying in a clinic bed far from here, her little body fighting a sickness that demanded money I didn't have. This job was my only chance. The guard barely looked at me before opening the gate. "You're the new one," he muttered, shaking his head. "Good luck." It sounded less like encouragement and more like a warning. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the tense, listening kind, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The marble floors gleamed like ice, and every corner seemed to watch me. Then I saw her, Madame Rose, standing at the top of the grand staircase. She was draped in silk, her hair perfectly arranged, lips painted in a shade of red that warned of danger. "You're late," she said, though I was right on time. Her eyes swept over me like I was something she had ordered but regretted. "Follow me." From that moment, the rules came like hammer blows. I was to rise before her, have breakfast prepared exactly as she liked, clean until the floors reflected the ceiling, and never, ever answer back. The first slap came on my second day for not folding her scarf crisply enough. It burned, but I didn't cry. I just lowered my eyes and said, "Yes, madam." By the third week, I understood why the others had fled. She would call my name for no reason, just to see me run. She'd inspect my work and find fault in places invisible to the human eye. She'd make me serve tea, then pour it down the sink, claiming it was too cold. Her voice could slice through my skin, but her silence was worse, cold, heavy, and full of judgment. Still, every time I thought of Deborah's fragile breathing, the tubes in her nose, the way her fingers curled weakly around mine when I visited, I swallowed my pride. This wasn't about me. This was survival. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the servants' quarters, counting my first month's wages. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. My hands trembled as I tucked the money into a small envelope addressed to the clinic. I thought I was alone until I heard footsteps behind me. "You think you'll last here?" It was Saad, the cook, her face tired but kind. They all come with that look in their eyes, fire. "But Madame Rose, she'll burn you out." I shook my head. "I'm not here for me. I'm here for my daughter." Something in the way I said it made her pause. "Then God help you. And maybe that's the only thing that will help her too." The days blurred into each other. Early mornings, endless chores, and Madame Rose's unpredictable storms. Once, she threw an entire tray of dishes because I placed the dessert fork to the left instead of the right. Another time, she accused me of scratching the glass dining table when it was clear the mark had been there for years. And yet, I noticed something odd. The more I refused to react, no tears, no anger, no pleading, the longer she stared at me after each insult. It was as though she was trying to read something in my silence, something that confused her. One afternoon, while polishing the brass railing on the staircase, I caught her watching me from the landing. "Why don't you quit?" she asked abruptly, almost as if the question had escaped before she could stop it. I kept my eyes on the cloth in my hand. "Because I need this job, madam." Her brow furrowed, and for a fleeting second, her voice softened. "Everyone needs something." Then she turned away before I could understand what she meant. Weeks turned into months. My back ached from scrubbing, my hands were rough from bleach, and I learned to read her moods from the sound of her footsteps. But each envelope I sent to the clinic brought Deborah closer to the treatment she needed. I could endure anything for that. One rainy evening, I was serving dinner when Madame Rose received a phone call. Her face drained of color, and she left the table without touching her food. I cleared the dishes quietly, but when I passed by her study later, the door was slightly open. She was sitting there, head in her hands, the mask of power stripped away. For a second, she looked human. I didn't knock. I just placed a cup of hot tea on her desk and walked out. The next morning, she didn't slap me when I accidentally spilled a drop of milk on the counter. She simply wiped it herself. It was such a small thing, but in that house, it felt like a shift in the wind. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first crack in the ice that wrapped itself around Madame Rose's heart. And somehow, without meaning to, I had put it there. From that morning, the air in the mansion felt different, though I couldn't explain why. Madame Rose still barked orders, still expected perfection, but the sting in her words wasn't as sharp. It was as if something had shifted deep inside her, though she'd never admit it. I kept my head down, still working the same long hours, still sending envelopes of money to the clinic. But now, when she passed me in the hallway, her gaze lingered just a second longer than before. One day, while dusting the library, she walked in without warning. I braced myself, ready for criticism, but instead she asked, "Where is your family?" "In Lagos mainland, madam," I replied cautiously. "All of them. Just my daughter. She's sick, at a clinic." My throat tightened. I had never spoken of Deborah to her before. She didn't respond immediately. Her fingers traced the spine of a leather-bound book as though she were considering something. Then, softly, she asked, "What kind of sickness?" I hesitated, unsure if she really wanted to know, or if this was some trap. "A blood condition. She needs treatment we can't afford." Her eyes flicked to mine, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw sadness there. "Finish here," she said briskly, and left the room. But I noticed her steps were slower than usual. From then on, little things began to happen. One afternoon, Saad whispered to me that Madame Rose had instructed her to make an extra portion of dinner for the maid. Another time, I found a pair of comfortable shoes placed neatly by my bed, my size exactly, though no one admitted to putting them there. Still, the storms came. If the silverware wasn't polished to her liking, she could still erupt. But there was hesitation. A pause before the temper. A restraint that hadn't existed before. And I began to wonder if my silence was no longer just defiance. It was reflection. Perhaps she saw something in me she recognized in herself. It was during the Harmattan season when I saw her vulnerability again. The air was dry, the wind rattled the windows, and the staff was moving sluggishly from the cold. I was carrying fresh linens up to her room when I heard her coughing violently. Without thinking, I pushed the door open. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching her chest, her face pale. "Water," she rasped. I hurried to the bathroom, poured a glass, and held it out. Her hands trembled so much that I had to steady it for her. When she caught her breath, she looked at me, not as a servant, but as someone who had seen her weak. "I don't like people seeing me like that," she murmured. "I didn't see weakness, madam," I said quietly. "Just a person." For a moment, she stared at me as though trying to decide whether I was mocking her. Then she gave a small, almost invisible nod. "Leave the linens. You may go." The very next week, she surprised everyone. At breakfast, in front of the entire staff, she announced, "Naomi will now oversee all household operations. Any complaints, you take to her first." There was a stunned silence. Sada's eyebrows shot up. Even the butler dropped his spoon. My own heart thudded in my chest. "Madam," I began, "That's all," she interrupted, sipping her tea as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The change in my duties meant longer hours and greater responsibility, but also respect. The other staff began to treat me differently, not just as another maid, but as a leader. And while Madame Rose still had her moments of coldness, there was something warmer beneath it now, something that peeked through in the smallest gestures. One night, as I reviewed the household accounts, she came into the study and set an envelope on the desk. "For Deborah," she said simply. I froze, my fingers brushing the thick paper. "Madam, I can't." "You can," she cut in. "And you will. I have contacts at St. George's Medical. They'll take her in." I was too shocked to speak. My eyes stung, and I blinked hard, unwilling to cry in front of her. "This doesn't make us friends, Naomi," she added, but her voice lacked the old edge. "It's just some things shouldn't be lost if they can be saved." That night, I prayed for her, something I had never done before. I prayed not just for Deborah's healing, but for whatever wound in Madame Rose's life had made her the way she was. As weeks passed, the mansion began to feel lighter. The staff laughed more, the rooms felt warmer, and Madame Rose's laughter, yes, laughter, was heard more than once. She even joined us in the kitchen one afternoon, helping Saad stir soup. None of us could believe it, but it wasn't until Deborah came to visit, after her first successful treatment, that I saw just how far Madame Rose had come. She stood at the door, watching as my daughter ran into my arms. For a moment, I thought she would leave quietly. Instead, she walked over, knelt down to Deborah's height, and handed her a small wrapped box. "It's for you," she said, her voice almost gentle. Deborah's eyes lit up as she unwrapped a tiny silver bracelet. "Thank you, Auntie," she said shyly. I caught my breath. "Auntie," and Madame Rose didn't correct her. It was in that moment I realized, whatever had been broken in this house, in this woman, was slowly mending. And somehow, without meaning to, I had been part of the repair. After Deborah's visit, something inside me shifted too. I had come into that mansion expecting nothing but endurance, survival. But now, there was an unspoken connection between me and Madame Rose. It wasn't friendship exactly, and it wasn't the closeness of family either. It was something in between, a strange trust built from silent battles and slow healing. Deborah's treatments continued, each one bringing her closer to health. Madame Rose handled the arrangements with the same precision she once used to critique the placement of a fork. She never spoke of it as charity, never dangled it over my head. Instead, she treated it like business, something that needed to be done and done well. And for that, I respected her even more. One evening, after the last of the dinner guests had left and the house was unusually quiet, I found her sitting in the garden alone. The lantern light cast soft shadows over her face, making her look younger, less guarded. "Why did you stay?" she asked without looking at me. I sat down on the stone bench opposite her. "Because leaving meant giving up on my daughter. I couldn't do that." She nodded slowly. "I used to think leaving first was strength. Walking away before someone could hurt me more." Her voice caught slightly, and I realized she was speaking about herself. But maybe staying has its own strength. We didn't speak for a while after that. The night breeze rustled the flowers, and for the first time, sitting there beside her didn't feel like sitting beside a boss. It felt like sitting beside someone who understood. Months passed, and my role in the mansion expanded. I began managing household accounts, scheduling maintenance, even organizing events. Staff members came to me with their problems, knowing I could approach Madame Rose in a way no one else dared. She listened to me now, even on small matters. It was strange to remember the woman who once slapped me over a scarf. Then came the day Deborah was discharged from the clinic. She came to the mansion, her face full of color, her steps quick and steady. The entire staff gathered at the front door, cheering. Madame Rose stood a little apart, her arms crossed as if she didn't want anyone to see her emotions. But when Deborah ran to her and hugged her waist, she didn't pull away. She rested her hand lightly on my daughter's back, her eyes glistening before she turned sharply and walked inside. From that day, Deborah began spending weekends at the mansion. She would trail behind me as I worked, or sit in the kitchen learning recipes from Saad. Sometimes, I would find her in Madame Rose's study, coloring quietly while Rose went through her papers. Neither of them spoke much during those moments, but there was a comfort in the silence. One Sunday afternoon, I overheard Deborah telling Saad, "Auntie Rose doesn't smile all the time, but when she does, it's my favorite." I smiled to myself, because I understood exactly what she meant. By the end of that year, I was no longer called the maid. Guests were introduced to me as the one who keeps this house together. Even suppliers who had never bothered to learn my name before now greeted me warmly. My uniform was replaced with smart dresses, chosen by Madame Rose herself. Still, I never forgot where I started. Sometimes, when the house was asleep, I would walk through the silent halls and remember my first night here. The cold, the fear, the determination that had held me upright. And I would whisper a silent thank you to the God who had given me the strength to endure. The biggest surprise came one evening when Madame Rose called me into her study. She was holding a stack of papers. I'm making you co-manager of my catering business, she said, sliding the documents toward me. It's steady income, and it means you'll be here for Deborah without working yourself into the ground. I stared at her, speechless. This house, it's not just mine anymore, she continued. You've kept it standing. I don't mean the walls. I mean the people in it. And I don't forget things like that. It was in that moment that I realized the full circle of our journey. I had come into her world to survive, but in surviving, I had changed it. And her, forever. The mansion on Bishop Adme Drive no longer felt like a palace of broken spirits. It was a home now. Laughter bounced off its walls, and kindness moved through its rooms like sunlight after a long storm. Madame Rose was still Madame Rose, sharp, commanding, impossible to ignore, but she was also something else, someone who had let love back into her life. And as for me, I was no longer just Naomi the maid. I was Naomi, the woman who stayed, the woman who endured, and the woman who, without realizing it, had done the impossible. This story is more than just about a maid and a mistress. It's about the hidden battles we fight in silence, and the way endurance can be more powerful than any outburst. Sometimes, life will put us in places that feel unbearable, places where the easiest thing to do is to run. But if the reason you're staying is bigger than yourself, if it's rooted in love, hope, or a greater purpose, then that staying can transform not just your life, but the lives of those around you. Madame Rose taught me that even the hardest hearts can be softened, and I taught her that quiet strength is not weakness. It's a force that changes everything it touches. The mansion that once echoed with fear now rings with laughter. And my daughter, who once lay in a hospital bed, now runs through its halls free and full of life. So, if you're in your own storm right now, remember, sometimes the victory isn't in leaving, but in holding on until the storm passes. If you love this story, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the lesson you're taking away. Your thoughts matter here.